to everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Tatiana Ballantyne, the mayor of Somerville. I am truly, truly honored to serve as the chair of the MBTA Advisory Board's Climate and Clean Energy Committee. I feel it's important just to say a few words up front with everything that's going on in the world. I want to say that scientific data demonstrates that human activity has increased the pace of climate change. I also accept that if we make changes to our policies, we can correct the problems of human activity. As mayor, I know firsthand that climate action and transportation are deeply connected. In Somerville, we've made bold commitments in our climate forward plan where transportation and mobility are the key focus areas. Expanding access to public transit, improving biking, walking infrastructure, and accelerating the transition to electric vehicles aren't just environmental goals, that they're about public health, equity, and quality of life. My own journey into public service started with grassroots advocacy for public transit, environmental justice, and workforce development. That's why I'm steadfast advocate for regional rail, because a modernized electrified commuter rail network will reduce emissions and improve mobility, not just for Somerville, but the communities across our region. So I'm really excited to get to work with all of you, our committee members, our staff, our agency partners. We have important work ahead, and I look forward to the discussions that we have, the progress we'll make together. And with that, I would say let's get started. And therefore, I move the first agenda item to introduce our first speaker, Massachusetts Climate Chief Melissa Hoffer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Ballantyne. I'm very excited to be here with the advisory body today and the climate committee. I have about 10 or so minutes of comments prepared for you. And if, of course, if there are questions along the way, or I say something that you don't understand or have a question about, please, I think we can be a bit informal and just go ahead and ask. The two things I wanted to speak about today were a little bit about how the Climate Office does its work. If you want a summary of what we are doing, you can look at the October 2023 Climate Chief recommendations, but the how is the really kind of important and innovative aspect of it. So I want to talk to you about that. And then I know there was interest on where we are with the climate action plan planning and how it relates to transportation sectors. So we'll take some time to go over that. So the position that I currently hold is the first cabinet level climate chief position in the country. I am 100% confident it won't be the last. I would fully expect to see similar roles like this in private sector and in other non-governmental sectors as well, just as climate change becomes, an even more pronounced defining feature of our time, and as its economic impacts become more profound, as we've seen over the past year with the LA fires now estimated to cost something on the order of $250 billion. And then we saw just over the weekend, tragically 36 Americans dead as a result of more extreme weather across the American South. So how do we do this work? The office was established by Executive Order 604. It was the very first executive order that the governor signed on her very first day in office. So it sent a big signal about how much the governor prioritizes this work. And the idea is that really in the past, climate change has been a province of really environment and energy secretariats, whether that's at the federal or the state level. So EPA, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, principally responsible for carrying out climate policy at the federal level. Here in Massachusetts, that's typically the Department of Public Utilities and the Department of Environmental Protection, or the Executive Agency of Energy and Environmental Affairs. But as we all know, climate change is much broader than that. For many years, it's been deemed a threat multiplier by the Pentagon. It's a national security issue. It's a huge health issue, as I know folks at MBTA have long been focused on. It's a big issue related to transportation, to public safety, and to the economy. So you really can't have just the environmental folks dealing with it. It needs to be a whole of government approach. And that is why the governor put the executive order in place that requires that whole of government approach. So this job is actually highly collaborative. I work with folks across all the secretariats, and that is done in a formal manner. The executive order establishes secretariat climate officers in each secretariat. So those folks are responsible, and these were not new hires. So these are folks who are specialists in their subject matter area and also had an interest or an aptitude to address climate as well. And they are the ones responsible for carrying out the climate-related policy missions of their organizations. So we work very carefully. At this point, there are really, small teams within each of the secretariats that work with us on these issues. So establishing that administrative infrastructure is very important for moving a whole of government approach, because you need your experts who can help vet policy and help you understand how to move an agenda in their particular space. I'm going to give you a couple concrete examples of it in a moment. We also established a climate cabinet. That cabinet meets monthly. It's with all the secretaries and me. And we've used it over the course of the first 2 years, largely to educate on various matters that are of relevance to the secretaries. So these are folks who come into their roles with often decades of experience in their subject matter areas, but they may not have broad experience or knowledge regarding climate change. So the kinds of experts we have brought in help them understand the impacts of climate change on financial markets, on real estate markets, on public health, on mental health, resilience issues, impacts on seaport, for example, was the subject of a meeting that we had. And it gives the secretaries a chance in a more relaxed environment to hear presentations, to ask questions, and to learn along the way. We've also used it to begin focusing on some areas where there are natural tensions. So lots of land use from all the secretaries. There are needs for economic development. There are needs for housing. There's needs for transportation expansion. There's also a need to conserve a lot of land to meet our statutorily mandated net zero by 2050 climate goals. So how do we accomplish all those aims, all of those key gubernatorial priorities in a way that allows us to succeed at our individual missions and our collective mission at reducing greenhouse gas emissions? So the position is fundamentally disruptive. It's intentionally disruptive because it is driving change through each of these different bodies, sometimes asking us to think differently about things, or sometimes asking us to think at all about things that we may not have in the past. It's also inherently intersectional. So it's one of those areas that really plays up the need for generalist knowledge. We have lots of subject matter expertise across the agencies. We're always going to need that, but we also need the benefit of having folks who can step back and see the big picture and how these things sometimes relate to each other. So I want to just give you a few brief examples of the how, and then we'll move on to CCAP. Procurement is a big one. When I first came into this role, I worked very closely. Some of you may have worked with Gary Lambert at Operational Services Division, which is part of A&F. They do procurement for the state. And so one of the first things they did, and they came in with this idea, was to put together a survey that would begin to look at all of our vendors and ask them for disclosure of their own carbon emissions. And right now, we're not making any contracting decisions on the basis of that information, but we are getting those disclosures. We are analyzing them. And soon in the future, we will begin to make procurement decisions on those folks who are doing the most to reduce their own carbon emissions. Our acute care hospital contract is negotiated on I think, a biannual basis. And this is done by Health and Human Services. So we partnered with Secretary Walsh. This would not have been possible without her leadership. And what we wanted to do there was to find a strong motivator for hospitals to begin tracking and reducing their Scope 3 emissions. There's a huge amount of emissions that come from hospitals. So, Scope 1, that's their direct emissions. Scope 2, it's typically the energy they rely on. And then Scope 3, which is all of the products and services that they are purchasing. So through this contract, which is the contract that needs to be in place in order for hospitals to be reimbursed for mass health expenses that they incur, we are requiring them to track their Scope 3 emissions. That begins in June of this year, and they will then begin tracking. And tracking is the first step towards reductions. You kind of have to get your, folks know, like with, if you want to manage anything, you kind of have to track it and understand it first. And the same is true with this. Many of the hospitals have already begun to look at these Scope 3 emissions. Some of them are leaders in developing ways to reduce those emissions. So I think there'll be some cross-pollination within that hospital community. But we were very proud of that and very pleased with the partnership with the hospitals. There's a little known provision in the climate legislation that passed, the governor signed at the end of last year, that establishes a low embodied carbon intergovernmental coordinating council, which is a long way of saying we have a fabulous group of people coming together from the building trades, architects, folks in state government, members of the legislature, and we are going to be establishing the global warming pollution potentials for a number of different common construction materials like cement, like asphalt, and steel. And that will be helping us to understand how we will begin to integrate environmental product disclosures in our contracting process so that when we're asking people to complete projects for us, we'll be getting bids on those projects where folks are coming in proposing to use as cost feasible low embodied carbon materials. And I will say this is a very cool virtuous cycle because we've got a number of startups in Massachusetts that are leading the way globally in processes to develop things like low embodied carbon steel. We see that with Boston Metal, and we see with Sublime Systems out in Holyoke with low embodied carbon cement. So it's a great way, again, like all procurement decisions for the Commonwealth with its, as in its role as a customer, as a purchaser, to send a market signal about demand for these types of products. And last, I just wanted to touch on the Community Climate Bank. It was one of the governor's first initiatives that we launched in June of 2023. That's the first and only green bank in the country focused specifically on decarbonization of affordable housing. And when we looked across our quasis, we realized that mass development, mass CEC, and mass housing all had a piece of the expertise that we needed, but none had all of it. So all three of those quasi-governmental agencies worked together to advance the efforts and the product development of the Climate Bank, which is housed at Mass Housing. So that was a terrific way, working with EEA and Climate Office and those quasis, to really put together an entity that reflects the combined expertise of multiple different governmental entities. So just a little bit about our climate pollution reduction grant, which we received as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'm pleased to say that the funds are flowing for this as a result of the Attorney General's litigation to lift the funding freeze that was put in place through the now withdrawn OMB directive. We had an initial priority climate action plan, which was really a plan that helped position us to apply for the larger and longer term climate action plan. What that plan does in a nutshell is identify that the terminology EPA uses is measures, but you might use the word strategy in your mind to make sense of it. 50 different actions to help Massachusetts meet our net zero 2050 mandate. There is good but not complete overlap with what is in our clean energy and climate plan. And the thing that is different about this one is that it's really tied to where you get your biggest bang for the buck. So the priority with all of this planning, which we are doing with AECOM now, is to ensure that we're getting the greatest reductions for every dollar that we spend. So this is a high-level economic analysis that's giving us a sense of the cost, the benefit of the measures, and the co-benefits that come along with them, many of which are monetizable. So the aspects of this plan that do relate to MBTA were developed with MBTA's excellent input, and we are grateful for that. When I'm talking about co-benefits, I want to make sure people understand, those are sort of positive externalities of a particular policy. So that might be, when we have a decarbonization measure like, reducing VMT through the expansion of a public transportation system, we know those are going to include health co-benefits, principally through the reductions in NOx pollutants, stuff like SO2 and NOx and particulate matter. But there are also energy cost savings. There are avoided future climate damages, usually typically captured through a social cost of carbon, resilience benefits in many instances, and also equity, because we want to be thinking about, the location of that pollution and the value of the transportation to a particular community. So one, if you're kind of thinking like, well, like one concrete example of that is looking at example for the percent of GHG emissions that come from public busing, and then taking into account the cost of electrifying all busing and thinking about what are the health and other co-benefits that might be yielded by electrification of that busing. And then the question posed for analyzing each of these is, does that really make sense? Would we get more in terms of emissions reductions for a lesser investment if we were looking at another measure? Integrated with this is recommendation number 1 of my October 2023 report. And folks might remember that is the one where I said we really need to get our arms around the level of investment that's required across the board for us to get to net zero by 2025. Like many states, Massachusetts hasn't done that yet. It's actually a significant barrier because we haven't really thought of a funding and financing plan for the investments that are needed. And those are not all state investments. Some of them come from the federal government or used to, and some will come from private actors. So getting a better handle on what those investments are and who will be responsible for making them is really important so that we can have our strategy in place. So along with this work for the CPRG, we are developing a playbook of funding and financing measures. And my new mantra here on March 17th of 2025 is recycling funding. So the Commonwealth gives a lot of grants away, and we will probably always do that, but we really must get much more attentive to recycling those dollars. Things like a greater use of revolving funds, like the Clean Water Trust, for example, which even without growing the initial capitalization of that fund, just loans the very same dollar more and more. So you have a total value of loans that exceeds the amount of the initial capitalization. So revolving funds, super important. Leveraging revolving funds. When we have a dedicated revenue stream that's coming into a revolving fund, we get the loans being repaid with the principal and interest coming in, we can then go to the bond market and bond against that. That's not new for you guys, but it's new for a lot of other areas of state government. So thinking about ways for us to leverage and stretch, and then repurposing. Looking at the ways that we are currently spending money and really trying to get a handle on, like, is that the best way? Can we consolidate programs? And just as one example, we have over 60 programs throughout various secretariats that focus on building decarbonization. Do we really need all of them? Many of them have sort of overlapping jurisdiction over some things. So really giving that a hard thought and thinking about, are there ways that we could free up some of those dollars? So I think with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions. And I wanted to thank you for having me here today. And I wanted to, in particular, thank you now at this time. This is a very challenging time, as the mayor said at the outset of the comments. It's challenging because of what's occurring at the federal level and the unprecedented actions that we're seeing unfold. I know many of us are probably feeling personally afraid or anxious as these events happen. It's very difficult to see what's happening in the country. So it makes our work, I know you all know this, but it makes our work ever more important. And I know the governor's view is, we keep marching forward with what we're doing and what Massachusetts has always done, which is be exemplary and show how we can continue to serve these dual purposes or multi-purposes of achieving public health, of getting people around, keeping our vibrant economy with our transportation system, our public transportation system. And by the way, I've been riding the T and it's been fantastic. It's been on time. It's safe. I can't say how much I appreciate it. It deposits me 2 blocks from where I stay when I'm in Boston. I'm so grateful for it and how important this work is now, ever more than ever, when we see what's happening also with climate change. So we've got that double whammy of these threats to our democracy and then these threats to the ecosystems that are our life support. So I just wanted to thank you because your work is right at the heart of it, and I know how hard it is right now, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief Hoffa. That was, you're doing a lot of work. It's really intentional. I appreciate the overview. And I'm going to open it up for questions. Brian.
Thank you, ma'am. And Chief, again, thank you. Was incredibly inspired to hear to work with you on the Transportation Funding Task Force, and very grateful for you to be here. I guess my question is one that I've been asking for several years, which is the MBTA is in and of itself part of our mitigation strategy to climate change. It is by far the largest mover of people via electric propulsion, certainly in New England, and certainly one of the largest in the country. Yet it's often lumped in as part of the problem. And I guess I'd just be interested if there's any thoughts that yourself, your office had on ways the T can promote itself and speak more about how it's part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem.
I love that question, Brian. And I, first of all, agree 100%. I remember, folks probably remember Maggie Superchurch when she was at Groundwork Lawrence. I think some of the folks who've been around for a while might remember her. And I remember this was a conversation we had about 15 years ago. And we were talking about climate heroes and what do climate heroes look like. And Maggie piped up and she said, a climate hero is a mom walking with their kid, to the T station and taking the T to work and to school every day. And it really stuck with me. And I think that's the frame. This is the stuff that everyday people can do. And it is 100% true. I mean, just look at congestion pricing, just in the first week or so of that. And I did pull this for us before because I wanted to remind myself of these numbers. First month of operation, first in the nation program, $48.6 million in month 1, stands to raise billions for improvement on New York City's aging subway and bus systems that serve approximately 5 million people. Reports show the program has majorly reduced traffic and congestion, decreased travel times while improving speeds for buses and emergency vehicles. And I also just know from other articles that pollution is down. So that makes a better city. That makes a healthier environment. That makes it easier. There's some other stat that I didn't write down either, but just like the Broadway revenues for the first month that this has been in place have gone up because more people feel like they can come into town for shows. So it's better for the economy. So I think telling those stories, and I just brought together a group of climate leaders in the state last week. And one of the things we were focusing on, Brian, is the stories, the narratives. Like, get away from these numbers, get away from the sad old story about the funding and financing. And let's just talk about what this buys for us, because it's effectively priceless. And if you can tell the story of everyday people and what they get from it, I think that's huge. I'd be out on the street with a microphone talking to people about the benefits of riding the T. And I think the more that story comes out and we're relentless about it, we counter these narratives that tend to obscure the benefits that this service provides to the state.
Thank you. So next up was Chris and then Susan.
Thanks so much, Mayor. Thanks so much, Chief. This really builds on Brian's question. So Chief Hoffer, this may be similar to sort of a similar answer, but without question, I strongly believe in that narrative around the T, expanding economic opportunity, lowering congestion, reducing emissions, improving overall quality of life for all of us in our cities and towns and across the Commonwealth. As you look at the municipalities, both sort of on the screen and beyond, are there things that you feel like municipalities can be doing both as advocates for the T and allies to the T that really help move on that broad mission, in addition to sort of the overall sort of change in narrative that I think we're all trying to achieve?
Well, certainly it's been helpful to see, many of the municipalities that are covered by the MBTA communities law, coming forward with their plans and really taking that seriously. And I think that's important because, Chris, you and I know, like, these, I think in the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, somewhere is a sentence that says, like, expand transit-oriented development. And so, everybody's been thinking about it for a long time, and zoning reform and everything else. But here we have like an actual shot at it. And it was bumpy to begin with, but we've got a decent court decision now. People are moving forward with it, and we got to get this done. So I think the municipalities, like, look at the benefits for your communities. When it's really there, people really love it. It makes it a good place to be. It makes, I mean, we have to worry about gentrification, but it makes the values of the homes actually go up. So it's a good thing, and it's something that we should be uplifting and talking about again, what the benefits are to communities. And you can, there's an economic story there, there's a health story there, there's, a story about climate change in particular, there's a story about just having a better quality of life. And I think all of those have to come forward.
Thank you. Next up, Susan.
Hi, well, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate this conversation. Should have renamed myself. I'm calling from the town of Lexington, and we're what I call on the fringe of transportation services. We're on the outer fringe of MBTA service, so we don't get a whole lot of bus service. We have no train service, and we are just outside of RTA services. Lots of cars here. And we actually used to have more people that could take the MBTA because we had more service, and it has decreased over the years. And I do completely understand the challenge when you have constrained resources, that when you have to make cuts, you cut where there's, less people, less density. I understand that. But then that makes it more challenging because you have more people that are just going to drive into the cities, and we just can't build enough bus lanes to deal with that, right? So you may know too that Lexington was the first municipality to rezone for multifamily housing. There are many developments in the pipeline. I'm wondering what you would say to a community like ours that has only seen cuts to transit. And we have people that you probably know, a very strong sustainability advocacy group here, but there's doesn't seem to be a whole lot we can really do at this point in time to get more transit. I would love your thoughts or anyone else's on that.
Yeah, I think that's difficult. It's a real conundrum, and nobody on this call had anything to do with it, but it's sort of a case in point, right? That the T could have gone to Lexington and it didn't. And so, it's in some ways it's the poster child for why we really do want the benefits of transit. So for you all, it is challenging. Your closest commuter rail is Concord, I think, right? Which is a little bit of a haul depending on where you are in Lexington. Not everybody's going just in and out of the city. So I don't have a particularly good answer in this constrained funding environment for you without an RTA. I think there are some, again, depending on where people are going, there might be opportunities for some more micro transit solutions, or I'm forgetting the name, somebody can help me with it, the van service that used to take people in and out of certain areas, within the 495 corridor. But it is a hard and challenging situation. And I don't know if anybody else who is more familiar with Lexington has a better and more satisfying answer to that.
I wish I did. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Next up, Stephen.
Yes, I had just as a really statistical question, but you might hopefully know the answer. You look at all the damage nationwide that's being done by hurricanes and fires and all that. You have to think at some point that cost has to exceed what we're actually doing for clean energy or should be doing to meet our goals. And off the top of my head, I said we probably passed that already. But I was wondering if you really knew some of the numbers involved here as to what the damages are in relationship to what we're actually doing or should be doing in spending the money for clean energy.
Yeah, it's a great question, Stephen. There's the Potsdam Institute in Germany is a premier climate research institute. And about a year ago did a study where they were trying to get a handle on a part of your question, which is what is going to be the economic impact of the emissions that have already occurred? So these are things, these are the emissions that have already occurred from transportation sector, power sector, building sector over the course of our lifetimes, and most of which has occurred over the course of the last 15 or 20 so years. So their estimate is that by 2050, these are global numbers, not US numbers, but by 2050, the cost of responding to climate damages caused by the emissions that have already occurred will be about $38 trillion a year. So to give you a little bit of a grid for that, global GDP in 2023 was $105 trillion. So it's a huge portion of global GDP in 2023 dollars. So I think what they found that was most interesting, and I think kind of gets to your point, is that if you look at the cost of the mitigation that would be required to keep us at that, Paris target of limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, it would be 6 times more expensive to deal with the climate damages than it would be to just do that mitigation. So I hesitate to say this number, but you can read it in my report, is in the beginning of the report. But I think the IRA assumes, something like, $1 trillion annually for the United States by 2050 to hit our full electrification targets. That's probably about right. But the LA fires alone, the preliminary estimates is that they will cost $250 billion, and that doesn't take into account the longer tail economic impacts of those fires. Hurricanes, Helene and Milton together, $100 billion. So you're starting to see a real impact. And I think what's important to understand too is there's this extreme weather damage that you and I are talking about. But there are also ways, and the Fed chair, Powell, has testified to the Senate about this. There are ways that climate change is starting to exert upward pressure on inflation too. So if you look at things like what's happened in Southeast Asia with rice this year, there's been a shortage in rice because of weather events there. They've had to tap into their rice reserves. There were interruptions in potato production in the UK and in Ireland this year because of rainfall events. There are projected impacts to food supply to Europe due to, remember, that very heavy flooding that occurred in Spain last year. And I guess it knocked out a lot of the greenhouse and other infrastructure in Spain that tends to supply, more of the fruits and vegetables to the UK markets. So there are ways that it's already kind of showing up, and maybe you guys saw, I think this was on Saturday, the Post ran a story on why is coffee so expensive, the Washington Post. Sometimes like $7 a cup in some places. And that's because of the impacts of climate change in Brazil, where most of the Arabica is grown. So I'm giving you these big numbers that are estimates of an economic analysis done by a climate research agency, but I don't think it is also capturing these inflationary impacts of climate change too. So what I am 100% confident of, and I think you were getting at, is yes, it is a lot more expensive to deal with climate change on the back end than it would be for us to take the steps that we all know what we need to do. That is not the hard problem. The problem is getting everybody on board to actually take the steps. But yeah, climate change is very bad for the economy.
Okay. Next up, I believe, was Logan, and then I'm not sure if it was Corey or Brad, but Brad since I'm chairing and we're both from Somerville, I'm gonna let Corey go second. So Logan, please.
Thank you very much, Logan Casey, Sustainability Coordinator for the Town of Marblehead, representing Aaron Noonan, our selectman, chairing the select board. Thank you, Melissa Hoffer, for coming out here today. I remember just about a year ago, you were actually out in Marblehead serving some of
Yes.
our coastal resiliency projects. And I'm pleased to say that since then, we've gotten a coastal resilience grant to work on the State Street Landing area on some
That's
of our
great.
seawalls. So, we're definitely thinking about it on the municipal level over here. But I did kind of want to ask a question that was following up on kind of Susan Barrett's earlier question about kind of communities that have seen the impacts of fiscal constraint with the MBTA over the several decades. And I think one of the examples that I have is in my time in Marblehead, I've learned that in the 1970s the MBTA used to offer a direct bus service from Marblehead to Salem, which is no longer offered. The MBTA's bus system is very inner core centered and getting people towards the inner core, but not really around the region, which I think could
Yes.
definitely be something that could look towards an improvement. But I guess to that question is, looking beyond like a fiscally constrained MBTA, you've noted that transportation and specifically public transportation is going to be, a big part to getting towards our climate commitments. How do you go about in your role about communicating the need to, go beyond what we have today as a transportation system? I kind of, in my mind, I kind of think to like the big plans that, the state has historically created, like the 1960s highway plan. It doesn't have the criteria that we would analyze, what we want to build today. But, it was a really big, expansive plan that, set a goal for the entire state to improve certain, transportation aspects. And the other thing I'm kind of thinking about is like the big dig right now as well, too, to really alleviate, certain near-term tangible congestion, air quality problems that might be, easier to communicate to the population. But yeah, how do you think about going, in your position, advocating to the Commonwealth about, expanding the transit system beyond kind of the fiscally constrained, just towards Boston kind of setup we have today that, would really be needed to kind of achieve these, long-term climate goals?
So Logan, it's such a great question. And while you were talking, I was thinking about a meeting that I had at a community. I live here in central Massachusetts. That's where I am today. And I'm kind of close to Gardner. And I'd gone to a meeting at our local community college there and was just hearing how long it takes, to go from Fitchburg to Gardner on public transportation. It's not far as the crow flies. Like you could probably drive it in, I don't know, a half an hour, 35 minutes, something like that. And it was the faculty were saying it was hours for the students between waiting for the connecting buses to get there. So the word that came to my mind when you were talking about it is opportunity. And then I was thinking about my parents as they aged, which was not in Massachusetts, but they really became trapped in their house because they couldn't drive anymore. And it was hard to get out. I remember the cost I had to pay just to get my dad for, it was like a urology appointment or something. And I had to have a special van come that I had to pay for that could have him in his wheelchair. I mean, it's insane. And so I think about opportunity. And that is, I think, the story. And I don't think the conversation is over. Coming out of TFTF, we sort of identified different timelines. We had the immediate need, and that's been, addressed as an immediate need. But I think the governor's been pretty clear, like it doesn't stop there. There's more to be done. And as we build the case for it, I think it's a case about opportunity. If you can't get to school, if you can't get to your job, if you can't get your health care, if you can't have the daily things that make life good, connecting with your friends, seeing your family members, and a lot of people can't, then that decreases our opportunity. And it has a real impact on the ability for our communities to stay strong. So I think that's the leading kind of point that comes to my mind. And the other things, I mean, we know we're doing it because it provides these more transportation choice and opportunity, but then it comes with all these co-benefits that aren't just malarkey, like they're monetizable. The health benefits are monetizable. We know how to do that. We've done it in many other contexts. We know that the climate benefits are monetizable. We have a social cost of carbon. We can tell you today, and even this is math that even I can do, like what is the benefit of getting people out of cars and into public transportation? That's dollar savings. We know from the study that ABC did, which a number of us cited in A Better City in some of our discussions in TFTF. We know that it saves people money when they don't have to have a car. That's just common sense, but we actually know what the dollar amount is. So all of these things add up to more opportunity for folks. And if you are a young person, I'm surprised at this because when I grew up, all I wanted was to get my driver's license. That is not the case with young people today. And so I think you just have all this potential opportunity, and we are conversely cutting people off from opportunity when we don't provide that.
Thank you. So next up, Corey.
Hi, thanks for being here today. Corey from Cohasset, the representative that was appointed from the select board. There's two kind of things from Cohasset's perspective. We're an MBTA community because we have the Greenbush commuter line. We're also adjacent to some bus routes. The one frustrating thing from our perspective is when you're looking at a lot of these, climate action plans, especially electrification, commuter rail, electrification of rail is, especially on a line like ours, it doesn't have the overhead wires, is always at the very, very bottom. And there's money being spent to refurbish train engines that are already 20, 30 years old with the assumption they're going to be on for 20, 30 more years. So it is frustrating to hear a lot of the intent be there, but then when it comes to actually, it occurring, it's doesn't seem like it's anyone's priority. So that, and I do understand there's challenges. We've seen challenges, obviously, with electrification of buses. There's real physical challenges, but it does, from the perspective of our communities that are on these diesel branch lines, the message just doesn't get to actual on the ground changes. The other thing that I wanted to make you aware of is Cohasset. This is not MBTA, so I'll keep it short. We did a pilot project for an electric school bus with NLX, and NLX has declared bankruptcy and left the country. And this has left this school bus in this very, very weird space where we've had issues with charging, and it's really done damage to, it's considered, the pilot project considered a failure. The school's trying to get out of it. And I don't even think we're going to be able to broach the topic of electrifying the school bus fleet for, a decade. It's set this back. So I wanted to bring it to your attention because if we're doing these projects, we need reliable partners. That aren't just going to, and I know the industry's new, but there's real damage to these goals by experiences like this.
100%. Yep. It has to work or it leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And we've seen that with other technologies. So that makes sense to me. I want to make sure, Corey, you have a way to reach me because I want to put you in touch with Mass CEC to see how they can support you guys. They run the school bus program for us.
Yeah, no, we're in talk with them too.
Okay.
They're kind of stuck because they've paid out their grant. We're kind of in no man's land. They're kind of done, right? So we're just kind of stuck.
We should talk anyway. I have an idea. Okay.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Brad.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. And thank you, everybody who's joined this call and who's been doing all the great work before Mayor Valentine and I, hopped in here. So please forgive me if I'm asking a question that's been asked many, many times in this committee. Chief, you described some of your team's role as connecting the dots between different secretariats and different, functional groups within state agencies. But Corey's question just now about commuter rail and electrification brings to my mind one of the things that really unites this group in MBTA Advisory Committee. As Susan noted, MBTA bus service is a little bit limited across the 100-odd members of the advisory board, but regional rail, commuter rail is not. It is something that really has the potential to build strong, durable coalitions. And if we can demonstrate a real plausible near-term investment package to realize the benefits of electrification, of better service frequencies, I feel like many of the other themes that we've been touching on today start to become a little bit easier. And so getting to a question here, we know that resources are limited. We know that the MBTA has turned a corner and has done a better job over the last year of starting to articulate the capital and operating plan for regional electrified rail. But one of my perspective as a municipal transportation director is I see an immense amount of federal and state investment in traditional roadway bridge structures.
Yeah.
And that's a good and important thing. But in Somerville, we are constantly advocating with our partners at Mass DOT to future-proof those bridge designs anytime they overrun an existing commuter rail right-of-way, to make sure you've got horizontal and vertical clearances for the right types of track geometries, for the right types of catenary, or even drainage and telecom and positive train control style safety solutions. And so I wonder if one thing that you and your team could at least kind of investigate, and maybe this is already being done, is looking at Mass DOT's project development workbooks and guides and saying, hey, have we really thought about ways to leverage quote unquote highway dollars and facilitate equitable green mass transit in the process? So this is a perennial issue that we raise, and it's even more important now knowing what we know about the hostility of the new federal administration towards anything in urban communities and anything sounding like bicycle, pedestrian, or green, or equitable for that matter. Thank you.
Is this, now I have to ask you a question, Brad, because you're like clearly a million times more expert than I am on this. Is this the kind of situation where, I'm thinking about the reauthorization legislation, and if we have, money for a road and bridge purpose, that it can be sort of flexed for this hybrid transit benefit too?
Chief, I suspect so, and I'm sure others can kind of speak even more expertly than I can. My sense is that MBTA and Mass DOT do a good job of collaborating on these types of issues as one-offs, but it really depends on individual project managers, individual project teams, individual communities saying, have we really thought about the co-benefits of this investment? The formulaic approach to just, design it, bid it, build it, definitely does not include that kind of co-benefit analysis and future-proofing.
So this is very interesting, and I think, Brian, this one's really worth a conversation, because one of the things that DOT did in the run up to those recommendations coming out, where I was like trying to work with folks to figure out like, well, what, one thing that became very clear for DOT is that when they really want to get a new mandate accomplished, they do these PMOs, these program management offices, and it drives a certain management of projects. And I think it, includes things like, performance reviews and the like, to make sure that people are moving along to achieve these, particular milestones for a certain project. But standardization is one thing that's come up in a couple other contexts too. And there actually is a new hire for this climate PMO. And this sounds like a place where we should really be thinking about it, because this is completely unrelated. But there's another place where this conversation is happening is with respect to culvert replacement. And that's not just DOT, but a bunch of other places. So we're starting to think about, like, one of the big things I want to make sure, because there's 200 million proposed in the Chapter 90 bond bill for culvert replacement, which is awesome. So that's for municipalities. But I felt like I don't want a lot of that money to be spent on permitting, and want the permitting streamlined. So we've taken, 2 months with EEA and DOT and borrowed from the DOT's playbook for accelerated bridge. So I think that is looking like it will happen. And another idea that came to the fore, which is kind of like your idea, which is, wait, there must be certain categories of culverts where you actually don't need to have somebody come in and do a whole new design plan for it. You could standardize it and have like an off-the-shelf thing. And so that's kind of what you're talking about for these highway designs that we want to future-proof for. Yeah. So I think it's worth a conversation. So, I mean, Brian,
Yes.
I'm sure, yes, I'm sure we could make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's the MSBA approach, right? So they have a standard school design that is sort of, you have to opt out of it, right? I mean, just an example. So 15 years ago, Brad and I proposed making, whenever the state buys a new traffic signal for a municipality, it has to be prepared to accept transit signal priority.
Perfect.
Still don't do that,
Same idea.
right? And it's like, it's a no-brainer. But yeah, there's a lot we can do on that, Chief. So have your office reach out. I'd be happy to brainstorm a lot of these things with them.
That's great. And Brad, that was a great suggestion. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
God, I hope not. You guys are really fantastic.
So Chief, thank you so much for joining us. And, dare I mention, we'd love to have you back again.
I'd love to
But-
come back. I mean, this was great for me. And even just that last exchange I'm so excited about that idea. So this is really fruitful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Take good care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Chief.
Bye. So next up on the agenda is discussion on the 2025 committee charge. So Brian, I would like to pass it over to you to do the presentation on this item.
Thank you, ma'am. Much obliged. I believe I'm sharing what I think to be the draft on the screen, although Hannah and Isabella will probably tell me that my draft is woefully out of date because that's what they do. So what we're trying to do new with every committee this year is sort of set it up well in advance, our dates, kind of what we want to get across, and sort of what our goals and objectives are. And we're trying to do that through the form of a charter for each committee. This is the charter for this committee. The charge, which is at the top, was what was approved by the full advisory board at its meeting in February. But that doesn't mean it can't be changed, right? And so one thing that we want to do, and I'll try to make this bigger, is get as much sort of laid out in advance as possible. The other thing that I'm trying to have every committee do this year, which is different, is have each committee weigh in on the TCIP and on the T's operating budget, which is something we haven't done before. We've left that to those individual committees, but the modal groups and sort of the thematic groups have a lot to say on this stuff. And all of the question that you asked Logan, the question you asked there, Susan, it all comes back to the capital investment program and trying to shake the T, whom we love, out of its austerity mindset. And it's hard because it's been that way for a long time. But I think we can work on that, and I think we can make it better. So that is where this is sort of what I'm proposing as a series of topics for this year. Obviously, things can change. Obviously, things will change because none of us can know 9 months from now in December what we're going to want to be talking about. But this is sort of what's proposed. Happy to amend, adjust, change. But wanted to sort of make sure that directionally we're headed in the right area. There are many things that need to be discussed by this committee, and getting to everything in 1 year is a challenge. But I'm trying to get there as best we can. So I see some hands up, Madam Mayor. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so thanks for the Q&A. Brian, would you like to facilitate this portion of the Q&A?
I will do my best to match you, Madam Mayor. Steve, how can I serve you, good sir?
Yeah, so Brian, I did mention to you that my name is left off the membership list here.
You did, and that's why this one is woefully out of
Right.
date. So
So
I knew that
another
would happen.
suggestion that I have is looking, some June for the update on electrification and September for the bus fleet. That's a long time to wait for information on some of those. Maybe at the meetings, you can give your own summary of what the latest set of conditions are as far as advancing on those issues.
Good idea.
Okay, that's all I have.
Cool. Susan, you're also, no, you are there. There you are.
Yeah, I'm
You
there.
do exist.
Yeah, I just have an idea. And I realize we may not have a date for it, but kind of with the same idea of trying to get every committee to weigh in on the CIP, should we put a placeholder for the PMT? Having this group weigh in on that, which I don't know, maybe that's even
Yeah.
after November.
Yeah, well, they don't plan to publish it before December of 25, which is this year, and honestly, that'll be late. So I imagine we will spend most of 2026 on that very topic, but
Okay.
I don't think this year it'll be ready for us. It's already 2 years late, so what's another year? Chris,
Brian, a quick note. So I see climate resilience in the 2025 topics, but it's not in the charge. And I would just encourage us to, in the charge, note this focus not just on the efforts to decarbonize, but also to increase resilience, both from a MBTA operations perspective, thinking about the impact of coastal flooding on Cabot yards, Orient rail yards, et cetera, as well as from the riding public perspective. So thinking about extreme heat, the impact on people who may be waiting for buses, et cetera. So I would encourage us to expand the charge to be sort of reflective of the full climate risks and opportunities in front of us.
Good idea. Yes, I will do that, and we'll bring some proposed new language back next time we gather.
I'd also like to note there's a question in the chat that asks, what is PMT?
Excuse me, we tend to get into acronym soup here in government. The Program for Mass Transportation, which is the MBTA's long-term planning document that by law they are meant to publish every 5 years. The capital program, the capital plan they publish every year is meant to be based on that long-term 25-year horizon document that is called the PMT. The last sort of Program for Mass Transportation was published in March of 2019. Meaning it is 2 years late this year. It is very frustrating. We've asked about this, and the advisory board is actually the principal client of this document. And we're told it'll be ready this December. So very frustrating that we continue to sort of, the T continues to operate outside of its legal requirements. But there we are, ma'am.
Are there any other questions? So I'd like to call for a vote to accept the committee charter with the one correction because Stephen's name was missing on that. So I'm asking.
And we'll add that sentence that Chris asked for too, ma'am.
Yes. Excuse me. Yes. Thank you. Would a member like to move acceptance?
So moved.
A second motion to accept?
I'll second that.
Great. Then we should call for a vote, please. Brian, do you want to do the roll call?
Sure. Steve Olenoff.
Yes.
Susan Barrett.
Yes.
Logan.
Yes.
Chris Osgood.
Yes.
Sheila Page.
Yes.
And Mr. Corey Evans.
Yes.
It is unanimous, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So next on the agenda is approval for the meeting minutes of June 7th, 2024 and October 10th, 2024. Are there any edits?
Sorry, these are so delayed. The last time this committee gathered, there wasn't a quorum to vote on minutes. So we have ones from last June. Apologies.
Okay. So I don't believe there are any edits. So I'm going to ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Stephen. A second to approve the minutes? Anybody?
Seconded.
Thank you, Chris. And Brian, would you call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Steve Olenoff.
Yes.
Mayor Ballantyne, I missed you
I
the
know.
last vote. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I will
Mayor
say I
Ballantyne.
said a yay on the previous. Yes.
I apologize, ma'am. Thank you. Susan Barrett.
Get back out of this one because I'm frantically looking for the minutes. I don't think I've seen them, so I'm sure they're fine, but I'm going to back out. Thanks.
Okay. Logan Casey.
Yes.
Chris Osgood.
Yes.
Sheila Page.
I'm gonna abstain as well. I was not part of the committee at that time, those
Okay.
times.
Corey Evans.
Abstain as well. I also can't find the minutes and can't recall if I was there during those. So if you got your quorum, we're good. But
Yep, the motion will pass 3 yes, no no's, and 3 abstentions. Did I get that right? Okay, good.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. So next up is a motion to adjourn.
Happy to make that one. So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second
Second.
that.
Okay. How about on this one? How many say yes? Ayes. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Are there any nays? No, I don't know, Corey, your thumb's still up. You want to stay in this meeting?
Not going down. I can't control it. There we go.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll see you in
Thank you.
April.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Everyone.